Welcome to Below the Line with Dr. Bennie Harris. The Chancellor of the University of South Carolina Upstate talks with top leaders about issues such as change, technology, education, and leadership. Please enjoy.
Welcome to Below the Line. My guest today is Dr. Tonya M. Matthews. Dr. Matthews serves as President and CEO of the International African American Museum. Let me talk a little about her background, and then we'll get into a discussion with Dr. Matthews. Dr. Matthews is a renowned thought leader in institutionalized equity, social entrepreneurship, and educational intersectionality. She currently serves as President and CEO of the International African American Museum in Charleston, South Carolina, situated at the historically significant site of Gadsden, Wharf, one of the nation's most prolific former slave ports. Dr. Matthews combines her unique background as both a poet and as an engineer to bring a multifaceted perspective to her work. She's a highly sought-after vision partner for boards and community projects, leveraging her extensive experience in leadership roles to drive meaningful change. A dynamic and engaging public speaker, Dr. Matthews frequently addresses diverse audience on critical topics such as equity, inclusion, and the importance of both formal and informal education. Her dedication to community engagement and authentic storytelling makes her a prominent figure in the ongoing dialogue about America's journey towards a more inclusive and equitable society. I'm going to talk more about Dr. Matthews' background, but she's also a member of Delta Sigma Theta,
of course,
and a proud Lynx. So I had to say that.
Yes.
I got to say that. Dr. Matthew, I read that you made this statement about the museum. You said the museum strives not only to provide a space for all visitors to celebrate and connect to this history, to these stories, and to the art, but also to find meaning within their own stories. Talk about that perspective a little bit.
Yeah, so of course, folks are coming to a history museum and they know this and they're expecting to learn some things, maybe some things they already know well, some things they want to expand on. So folks are in that position, right?
Okay.
That's the story and the history. But we built a genealogy center, a world-class genealogy center, the Center for Family History, inside of our museum, so folks could explore their own stories. Now, of course, this is special for African Americans because our story was interrupted by this period of slavery and enslavement because of record keeping. But as one of my great aunts would say, if you do the hard stuff first, the rest of it just comes natural.
Okay.
So that does make us a full service, first class genealogy center for everyone.
That's pretty unique. We're going to come back to that.
Yeah.
But let's talk about you. I read that you liked museums as a child. Now, I've always liked taking the idea of bringing children to the museum. My wife and I have 3 adult children now, but we used to take them to the museum in Birmingham, and there had to be lots of toys there. There had to be games and interactive exhibit. Was it the kind of museum that you enjoy going to, or was it something different?
Yeah, much
and
to
why?
my brothers and sisters' chagrin, no, it was not. Okay, I was down for the Words on Wall museum, so I was very, very classic in that space. I was always fascinated by things I didn't know, and also as a kid, museums are very big, like physically big. The statues seem so big. The pictures seem so big. The stories seem so old in terms of that. So no, I was the kid dragging the others. So I'm responsible for a lot of ice cream bribery in my family. My mother would bribe my brothers and sisters to just let her read everything and we can go in terms of that space.
Okay.
But it was interesting, even through all of that, I never actually considered museums as a career path. I just considered them something to see or go to.
Let's talk about that. Your education and your professional trajectory. You studied biomedical engineering and electrical engineering at Duke University, and you completed a certificate in African American Studies while there. Then you earned your PhD at Johns Hopkins University, where you researched the DNA of inner ear hair cells while working at the Maryland Science Center. Yeah. So first question here is, why inner ear hair cells?
Oh, not just inner ear hair cells, the inner ear hair cells of chickens. Okay.
That's even more interesting.
It got even better. But the long story short is actually very simple, which is that humans and chickens have that in common, these inner ear hair cells. And the difference is, though, that when human hair cells are damaged, we go deaf. When bird hair cells are damaged, they grow back. Okay. And so that was the point of studying in that environment to see if we could figure out how to trigger our own cells to restore and grow.
Okay. You make any progress there?
Listen, I made my portion of the progress before I got out. Scientists, we are building blocks, communities.
Great.
Yes.
So after finishing your education, you joined the Maryland Science Center, then worked in the Food and Drug Administration, the Cincinnati Museum Center at Union Terminal, and later took on the president and CEO of the Michigan Science Center. While there, you launched the STEMinista project to engage girls and their future with STEM careers and with twos.
Yes.
And you're now involved with the STEMinista project, Rising, which supports professional women in STEM, which an inclusive emphasis on women of color. Can you tell us about those two projects?
Yeah. So I usually say STEMinista. It came from like fashionista. But people were talking about that. And it was, I was in engineering.
So I pronounced it all wrong. It's STEMinista.
Listen, you said that, sir, not me. So I was just going to, do a little pivot there. But, part of it was, I think we've had a lot of conversations now about getting young girls, young female adults interested in STEM careers, right? The lack of being seen and heard in those spaces, lack of role models. And so working on the project at that level, I think was in the it's about time category. But what we also find is that once in the career, like we know how challenging these degrees are. You've gotten your degree, you've jumped through the gauntlet, you have the job. We were losing female practitioners in the STEM space in under 4 years.
Okay.
Right? They were walking away. 1 out of 10 was walking away after doing all that work, putting in all that effort. Must have been some passion there. And so there's also an understanding that in addition to the breaking barriers that we're doing and the programs that we have to prepare women for these fields, we also still need community and encouragement and strategy sessions. So that's part of where that second half of the program came, which was actually targeting those who had already jumped the gauntlet and found out that we are not quite home free in the struggle there.
Okay. That's interesting. Now, your career took you into education with stints as an associate professor of inclusive workforce development at Wayne State University, and on the governing board of the National Assessment of Educational Progress, and on the Board of Science Education at the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Education. Throughout this time, you remained focused on STEM and what you're referring to as pre-K through grade pipeline. Can you tell me more about what you mean by that phrase and what, again, how does that integrate with STEM's priorities for you as well?
Well, I think so. One of the things that many of us knew, we use the term lifelong learning, but have a hard time sometimes putting it into practice. I mean, so of course, you as chancellor know that if you start recruiting a child in the May of their senior year, that is a very hard road to toe. Trying to convince someone that maybe this is the field or the strategy that you're interested in. And so the idea is that the pre-K there's no such thing as too young to engage a child's curiosity. In fact, the younger they are, the better they are. This actually includes STEM, right? This includes the math and the scientists. We now like to say, and we've always known, children are natural scientists. But on the other end of that spectrum, one of the reasons that America continues to excel and compete is because we are a lifelong learning society. Everything from, say, NOVA to the Discovery Channel to all of these things, to museums, to science fairs, to parks. It's actually part of the American ethos. And so we do actually continue to learn. And in that space, the informal side is thought of, yay, cool, I'm a smart side. But sometimes when we have to come back into the formal, some additional professional development or like leveling up, we consider that a hit. That's no longer considered, hey, you're one of the smart ones, you're still learning. And so part of that was working to reduce the stigma and make it just as exciting and accessible.
That's really interesting that you say that is because in higher education, we're doing the same thing. We're looking at these lifelong learning experiences and we're credentialing them and putting them in certificates, et cetera, particularly with AI and all the changes that's going to have to take place. So that's pretty exciting. What made you decide to take on the role of president and CEO of the International African American Museum?
That is a great question. I think I had finally come to the terms with the fact that I was indeed a museum person, right? So museum professional, sort of being in those spaces. Even when I had transitioned over to Wayne State University, part of it was using that skill set around engaging pipeline as opposed to just outreach. But also I had been in my career at predominantly white institutions for sort of that entire period, including, being CEO, leadership. And it was an age where you were the de facto CEO, but also the chief diversity officer, also the voice in the room. So there have been a lot of professional and personal practice in that space, in addition to the fact that I grew up in an environment that prioritized and talked about African American history. So when I got the call to help complete the building of the International African American Museum, the first thing I did was violate my own rule of never participating in a startup again. I had said that multiple times. But the more I learned about the project, everything from the scale of the project to the ability to be built at the site of Gadsden's Wharf, to the idea that we were going to be an international African American museum and have that conversation, it was all extraordinary. And so, it was an offer that I could not refuse, though I did pretend that there was an option for that while negotiating. But beyond that, it's just a remarkable opportunity.
So what are the challenges representing African American experience in one museum?
I think the challenge of representing African American experience in one museum is that people still do not understand that is not possible. When we think of art museums, for example, we know we need many, many art museums. There are all kinds of artists and art and approaches, et cetera, et cetera. You go to the Met and you want to go to MoMA. You still want to go to the Louvre because we have a natural understanding of how much there is to the story of art. We don't tend to look at African American history in that way. We suggest there's only, one half of the story, one perspective, or if the museum is big enough, you can fit it all in there. So I'm excited that IAAM, that's the way we pronounce our nickname, claims, to be the second largest African American history museum of our kind, which means there's one even bigger. Now there are two of us, and we're in this space of the rise of these large scale institutions that I think are helping people to understand. Because if you've been to one, you realize you've just been to one, and you're ready to go to the next one.
I had the joy of talking with Dr. Powers on Friday, and he talked about the concept of international. Give me a little bit of insight on it's an international African American museum.
Yeah, so we address being the International African American Museum from two perspectives. One is origin stories, right? So we talk about the origin of Africans, West Africans, of course, on the continent of Africa. But we also talk a bit about the ingenuity that they brought with them. So our timeline goes all the way back to 300 BCE, tracing the first records of human cultivation of rice on the continent of Africa. That ties very much into Low Country history. But then the second half is modern connections to the African diaspora. As we talk about slavery being a global industry, we can talk about the connections between food, culture, language, history, even genealogy of the descendant communities of formerly enslaved peoples all over the world. And so we talk about that.
That's exciting. I've been perusing the museum, and it's beautiful. It's an amazing work. I'm looking forward to finishing it. It's going to take a couple of days
to do it.
So below the line is a leadership column for the most part. So how would you describe your leadership style, and how would others describe it?
Yeah, that's a great interview question. So, I would say that my leadership style is collaborative and sensitive, empathetic in the way that we have to be in the museum, particularly in a space like this. You're stewarding other people's stories. So there's the business of the story, but then there's also the personal of the story. And the challenge is that the two are not always in conflict, but they don't always align. So you do have to create trust within your staff and your team, but also within your community. So, that said, I'm not a fan of meetings or chat on Teams, but these things happen in terms of thinking through that. I do like to empower my leadership in particular. So that, they have the flexibility, the framework of understanding this is how we're going, this is where we want to go. How we get there is what we've brought you to the team for.
That's a great way of looking at that.
So, best case scenario is, I'm hiring folks to do things that they are better at doing than I am. And I fully acknowledge that if you've met any of my leadership team. And I think that, the one thing that I know that my team says about me is that I am the epitome of this whole relentlessly optimistic person. It's one of our pillars. I had one of my teammates say once, you should just bring her a problem. If you want to see her light up like a tree, you just bring her a problem.
You're an engineer too,
because,
so
exactly.
You got to recognize that.
And so those things kind of go. But I think, it's important because, there are problems. We're a startup. We're a nonprofit. We're an African-American history museum in this day and age for whatever that means. And so there are challenges. And folks look to leadership to figure out whether or not we're supposed to be panicking. Like, how bad is it? How's the boss looking today? I don't know. She's revved up because we got a new problem to solve. And so I think that that leaning in to that space helps the team understand I am less interested in the appearance of the problem than I am in our relentless trek towards solving that problem. And God help us, can we do this joyfully?
I think often I tell my team that leadership is about projecting calm. Absorbing chaos, projecting calm, and giving hope. Absorb chaos, project calm, and give hope. Now, there's something else that's very interesting about you. You are also a published poet. With one of your works appearing in the 100 Best African American Poems in 2010. How did you become interested in this art form? And some people might think poetry and engineering couldn't be further apart from each other. Talk to us about that.
I acknowledge they are definitely a little bit apart. I think, one of my favorite authors, I'm going to, borrow a twist of phrase, Walter Mosley said, everybody's got one good book in them. The question is, do they have two? Right. And so the same with the poetry. So I think a lot of kids grow up, we're writing poems. I've got the roses are red, violets are blue, mommy, I love you, that kind of thing going. But I kept up with it. And I really do like words and wordplay in that space. And so that's where the poetry came from. When I got to college, I assumed, like most folks do, that I was going to have to put the poetry down so that I could focus on getting this engineering degree. And what I discovered
Two engineering degrees.
What I discovered, though, is that when I put the poetry down, the engineering became harder. Right? I was like, I don't know what's happening. And I thought, oh no, maybe I'm supposed to be a poet, which is an oh no, because I enjoy my health insurance. So then I tried to sort of switch. Maybe I'll do just a little bit more poetry, kind of half step on the engineering. And the flip happened. So it turned out that I was less creative in what I was trying to do. And so it turns out that inside me, however that works, the two of them are balancing each other. So I do not write poems about math. Or engineering and that kind of thing. And I do not consider creation of whatever remedy for chicken inner ear hair cells to be poetic. It's more of a balance that I'm working with. But I would say that as I grew into leadership and my leadership style, that is actually where I could see the two aligning. You do need your leader to be able to see a straight line and to plot and to plan and to problem solve. But to your point, the part about inspiring hope, communicating across different lines in different communities, that's definitely, I think, where the poetry and the writing actually comes in.
So what was the poem about in 2010 that was in the 100 African American top poetry?
Oh, that poem was a metaphor about superpowers. And I would take the things that were challenging African Americans. So, for example, it would be the power of the chameleon was the fact that if you robbed the drugstore, you would be 6'9", bald-headed, and dark black skin. By the time the cops caught you, you would be 4'2", weigh less than 100 pounds, a buck wet, and you had long dreadlocks. And so it was going back and forth in these images of Black folks that had been used against us and transforming them into superpowers.
Okay.
So it was tongue in cheek. It was funny, but in that sad, funny way that Black comedians do. So that was the poem.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like to talk about below the line. And what I mean by that is that oftentimes we know what's going on above the line. And it's real easy to lead in that space. How do you lead when you don't know what's going on below the line?
I think that is a really good question because, frankly, failure is easier to learn from than success, right? And so I think a lot of times, particularly for us in this startup phase, below the line is trying to figure out what is working when many things are working well. You know, for example, we've welcomed more than 155,000 visitors in our first year, and it hasn't even been a year yet. The question is who, why, where from, and can we get them to come back, right? But a lot of that is about recording that information when they're coming in. Do we ask the question, so how did you hear about the museum today? Okay, it's real hard to ask a year later, sort of after folks have come. So trying to figure out those things. Also, the scale of that interest is wonderful and rejuvenating, but are you prepared for the scale? You know, when I arrived at the museum, we were still in building stages. We had a team of 10. Clearly, it takes more than 10 people to welcome 155,000 visitors. And so figuring out how to scale up in terms of that. What does that mean about building upkeep and repair? So we're thinking through, I think, those kinds of things. The other big thing that's happening for us is we're in the midst of a culture change because we went from building a physical space to running an organization. And some folks are realizing, I'm a builder. I like to build things. I like things that are concrete. You stack this brick on top of that brick, and guess what? The building's there. But then there's the other side. No, I prefer the dynamism. I like the fact that every day is a new day because we have a new school group or a new family reunion tour. And so the cultures required to manage those two types of institutions are different from the top to the bottom. So all the way from the board, all the way through management to the front line. Those are two very different ways to operate. So that's another thing that's happening for us below the line.
Excellent, excellent. One final question, one last question. Do you have a hero?
Do I have a hero? You know, I have heroes, and I'm Gen X, you know, and so we don't really like name our heroes. We stalk them. But I would say actually that one of my heroes, because I'm finding so much more about her, old hero, Toni Morrison. So one, you know, as a writer, poet, you know, I read other people's books and sometimes I say, I could do that. Or I'll be there one day. Never read a Toni Morrison book that I thought that I could recreate in any way. I was always in awe of her ability to write. But then I actually found out that she was an editor. I never knew that she had worked for the publishing company. And then, you know, sort of watching it and learning about her, and for her to be in the fights that she was in, be that leadership or womanhood or inside the publishing or getting her own work out there in her own voice, she always seemed so calm and effervescent and just stately every time I had seen her. And so she has become a hero for me because of her ability to just maintain in those space and to command her own narrative, which a lot of us don't get to do. And so she's definitely
I do see that in her.
In the hero.
I see that. I never thought about it from that perspective, but I do see that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so very much for joining us on Below the Line. I'm here with Dr. Tonya M. Thank you.
Thank you.
The Below the Line podcast is brought to you by the University of South Carolina Upstate. Look for our monthly write-up in Greenville Business Magazine, and for more information, go to uscupstate.edu.